Emily entered the room as I was wiping the blood from the corner of my mouth. She approached me with a triumphant smile, her face full of smug satisfaction.
Thank you for enduring this on my behalf. You were just my stand-in. James pretended to cherish you all these years just to make you a target for our enemies.
I had long known that I was her substitute. Once, I accidentally saw a painting in James's study. It depicted a girl of about 10, holding a peach blossom, her smile radiant. That bright smile was something I could never learn. We only shared a resemblance in appearance.
I wanted to ask who she was, but I had no right to. After all, I wasn't even considered his concubine.
He snatched the painting from my hands in anger, carefully rolled it up, and put it away, warning me never to enter his study again. That night, he was passionately out of control, and it was a wild night. Afterwards, he kissed me tenderly.
Be good from now on.
I agreed.
It was only later that I learned that day was the day Emily got engaged to the Crown Prince, which explained his loss of control. Even if I was just a stand-in, I was the only woman by his side all these years. Everyone knew he favored and loved me.
When the Crown Prince captured me, I hoped he would come to rescue me, but I was more worried that he would fall into the trap.
What came instead was a volley of arrows. Some struck my chest, and my captor ended my life. See, everyone thought I was his weakness, that capturing me would control him. But in reality, I was just a pawn to mislead the enemy, a stand-in for Emily.
Your mission is complete. Even if you die now, James won't care about you.
Why did she need to compete with me for his affection? James's feelings for her were clear. He invited me to the flower festival, but his gaze passed over me and landed on her, deep and complex. The next moment, he smiled and placed a jade hairpin in my hair, held my waist, and kissed my forehead. He knew that without me to divert attention, his feelings for Emily would be too obvious. I was just a scapegoat. But I was resilient and refused to die easily. I used all my strength to push Emily away. James entered just in time to see her fall to the ground. He rushed to her side, tearing his clothes to bandage her wound. After comforting her, James narrowed his eyes at me.
Sophia, know your place. Emily is my duchess. Apologize to her.
She said she wanted to poison me.
Emily clung to his arm, shaking her head and choking on her words.
I didn't poison her. I just came to give my sister some medicine. Seeing her maid wasn't around, I thought I'd help. I didn't expect. Sister must have been too agitated to push me. I'm not hurt.
James gently stroked her hair, his eyes full of pain and tenderness. Towards me, there was only endless coldness.
Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. If you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion.
The Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital. Hearing that name, blood surged up my throat. After 5 years with him, he knew exactly what I feared most. I also knew that his expression was not a joke.
Duchess, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
I shouldn't have harbored any expectations for him. As soon as I finished speaking, my throat tightened, and I spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering James's face. I smiled apologetically at him. James once said I didn't smile enough, wasting my beauty. So, whether sad or happy, I always smiled when I saw him. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was his panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards me, and a trembling Sophia. Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. If you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion.
The Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital. Just hearing that name makes my blood run cold. James knows exactly what I fear most. Duchess, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
As soon as I finished speaking, my throat tightened and I spat out blood, splattering James's face. I smiled apologetically at him.
James always said I didn't smile enough, wasting my beauty. So, whether sad or happy, I always smiled when I saw him. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was his panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards me, calling my name, Sophia.
The room was filled with tension as James and Sophia faced each other.
Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. But if you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion.
The mention of the Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital, made Sophia's blood surge up her throat. After 5 years with him, James knew exactly what she feared most.
Duchess, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
She knew better than to harbor any expectations. As soon as she finished speaking, her throat tightened and she spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering James's face. She smiled apologetically at him, recalling how he once said she didn't smile enough.
I'm sorry, James.
The last thing Sophia saw before losing consciousness was James's panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards her, calling her name with a trembling voice.
Sophia!
I lived in the most secluded courtyard of the mansion. Yet, the servants' conversations always reached my ears.
Did you hear? James carved a pair of jade pendants, one for him and one for Emily.
Yes, and Emily replaced all the peonies Sophia had carefully tended with orchids.
James escorted Emily, dressed in her finest, to the palace banquet. They really are a perfect match.
They had been childhood sweethearts. If it weren't for the crown prince asking the empress to arrange their marriage, they might have been together long ago. Logic told me he had eliminated the crown prince to support a more suitable heir. But thinking of the painting in his study, I couldn't help but feel he had personal motives. During my recovery, I started playing the zither again. Just like when I was at the Drunken Red Pavilion, placing my hands on the instrument always calmed me. Without it, I wouldn't have survived those 7 years of torment. Lost in thought, I suddenly noticed James, whom I hadn't seen for a month, sitting beside me, resting his head on his hand. The sunlight illuminated his eyes, making them sparkle, and his lips curled into a slight smile, as if he were looking at something precious.
I didn't know you were coming, my lord. Forgive me for not welcoming you properly.
He pulled me back to sit down.
There's no need for that between us. How is your wound?
His sudden concern made me uncomfortable. I pulled my hand away from his and leaned to one side. Noticing his slight frown, I subtly moved back. This was my ingrained skill of reading people's expressions. He relaxed and smiled. To be honest, I hadn't seen such a bright smile from him in a long time. The last time was at the temple when I prayed for us to be together forever.
It's been a while since we went out together. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the theater.
Don't you need to accompany the Duchess?
I glanced behind him, where Emily stood a few yards away. Emily's face darkened, seemingly taking my words as a challenge. She lifted her skirt and ran over, grabbing James's sleeve and complaining.
James, why are you here? I've been looking for you.
Then she noticed the 7-stringed zither in front of me.
What a beautiful instrument. Give it to me. I'll play for you.
She probably thought James had given it to me, not knowing I couldn't afford such a fine instrument. But James knew it was my mother's heirloom, the only thing in the mansion that truly belonged to me. I looked at James pleadingly.
All right. Sophia, I'll find you a better zither later.
I didn't need a better one. I just wanted my own. I grabbed Emily's hand, pulling it away from my zither. She retaliated by tearing at my clothes. In the struggle, the strings snapped and a cut appeared on my face. My vision blurred, and I used all my strength to push Emily into the water. My wound reopened. It would have healed in another month, but now it would take longer. Emily only caught a cold because James immediately jumped in to save her. He demanded I apologize to her.
Give the zither to Emily. I'll personally make you a better one. She saved my life. I can't let her down.
Why did he think he was more important to me than my mother? The doctor said I needed to stay calm and avoid anger to survive. To save my life, I had to avoid arguing with him. I forced a perfect smile.
I think the Duchess would be happier with a zither you made yourself.
I had never refused him like this before. He was stunned.
Emily only wants a zither. I've given you so many treasures. Isn't that worth one zither?
A wave of inexplicable grievance surged in my heart. I thought risking my life as his pawn and taking Emily's place in danger was enough, but he wanted to trample on my dignity too. Of course, my lowly life couldn't compare to the daughter of a high-ranking official like Emily. There was always an invisible barrier between us. I had overstepped.
I thought taking her place and risking my life would settle our debts.
You can give her the zither, but can you promise me one thing? Let me go to the theater alone in the future.
He agreed. I placed the zither in his arms, plucking the strings one last time before letting go. James opened his mouth to say something, but I pushed him out of the room with all my strength. Closing the door, I collapsed to the ground, taking deep breaths. Before my mother passed away, she told me to live well, no matter what. As long as I could go out alone, I could find a way to escape the mansion.
I'm sorry, Mother. I had to trade the zither for my freedom.
Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. If you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion. The Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital, was a place of nightmares. Hearing that name, my blood surged up my throat. After 5 years with him, he knew exactly what I feared most. His expression was not a joke.
I'm sorry, Duchess. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
I shouldn't have harbored any expectations for him. As soon as I finished speaking, my throat tightened, and I spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering James's face. I smiled apologetically at him.
James once said I didn't smile enough, wasting my beauty. So, whether sad or happy, I always smiled when I saw him.
The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was his panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards me, and a trembling Sophia. That expression was just like when he appeared in the alley to save me, dealing with those 3 ruffians.
Watching the show so late?
I ran into an old acquaintance and chatted for a bit.
Anything else to say?
I shook my head.
He sneered, grabbing my wrist and pulling me towards him. Knowing that Emily is expecting, you still pushed her and caused her to lose the baby. I didn't expect you to be so malicious.
Lose the baby? It wasn't me. The smell of alcohol from him invaded my pores, and I instinctively turned my head away. It was still Emily, who could make him, someone who rarely drank, reek of alcohol. She often feigned illness, but this time she went so far as to harm her own child. Didn't she love James? Why would she do this?
He gripped my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. I just gave your instrument to Emily, and you hate me this much?
I said it wasn't me.
He would never believe me.
She only saw you yesterday. She invited you to dinner to apologize, and you cruelly pushed her. Indeed, a woman from a brothel behaves so despicably. You climbed into my bed back then, and now that I've married Emily, you want to harm us and meet with others in secret?
He pushed me to the ground, and a stone cut my palm. Indeed, in his heart, I was just a woman who would do anything to escape the brothel. I was blind to ever imagine we could be together for life, even without a title. But in his heart, I never existed. He stepped forward, his shadow engulfing me, the pressure overwhelming.
I said Emily is my family. If you bully her again, I won't let you off. Someone, take her to the countryside estate and lock her up. Without my permission, she is not allowed to come and go.
In the secluded countryside villa, it had been 3 months already. Besides Daisy and me, there were only servants and guards who were forbidden to speak to us. The only other company we had was a little stray cat. Originally, it was to be driven away, but I danced all night to persuade James to let it stay.
Yes, he had been coming to stay occasionally these past few days. His eyes were filled with complexity and regret when he looked at me.
When I served him food, I heard him say,
I will take you back.
As long as the Duchess is fine.
I didn't know how he found out, but it had nothing to do with me. Hearing my response, his brows furrowed, and his voice became urgent.
Don't you want to blame me?
Sophia doesn't blame you, my lord. You don't need to feel guilty. You redeemed me from the Drunken Red house, which is a blessing from my past life.
Indeed, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't even know whose bed I would be in, or perhaps I would have been beaten to death by Rose. From the beginning, he treated me as a pawn. It was my foolishness before. He just didn't love me. How could he be at fault? Even in the villa, he gave me countless jewels, medicines, and silks, never being harsh with me in terms of living conditions. Among the jewelry he gave me was a plum blossom ring, which was Lily's mother's relic, never leaving her unless she was gone. Daisy secretly found out that Lily was the crown prince's person. This meant that James knew from the beginning that I had a connection with the crown prince. So even if he suspected me, he treated me very well.
I don't hate him. But I won't love him either. His love is something I can't afford.
James left a zither, one he made himself. I accepted it with a smile but never touched it. He said he would take me back to the manor next spring. I agreed. On New Year's Eve, while thousands of lights illuminated homes, the fire in the countryside villa seemed insignificant. Daisy and I, along with the little cat, ran away while everyone was busy putting out the fire. Autumn passed, and spring came. 3 years had gone by. In Suzhou, a new musician named Lu Ruyan appeared on the stage. I changed my name and played the zither here. When I first arrived in Suzhou, I took walks with Daisy out of boredom and unknowingly walked into a theater. The master, who was rehearsing, recognized me.
It's good to be alive.
That was the first time I saw this stern old man show a gentle side. Father and the master were old friends. When I was young, I often came here, even saying I wanted to perform on stage someday. I didn't have the talent for acting, but I could play the zither. And so, 3 years passed. The little cat had kittens, Daisy was about to marry the blacksmith next door, and life was simple but happy. James came, not for me, but to investigate a corruption case related to water management. I was relieved but still reduced my outings. A few days passed without incident. One day, just as I stepped out, I was struck hard on the back of my neck and lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, Emily was smiling at me, pouring water over my head. Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. If you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion. The Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital. Hearing that name, blood surged up my throat. After 5 years with him, he knew exactly what I feared most. I also knew that his expression was not a joke.
Duchess, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
I shouldn't have harbored any expectations for him. As soon as I finished speaking, my throat tightened, and I spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering James's face. I smiled apologetically at him. James once said I didn't smile enough, wasting my beauty. So, whether sad or happy, I always smiled when I saw him. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was his panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards me, and a trembling Sophia.
Sophia!
Considering your injury, I won't hold it against you this time. But if you don't behave, I'll send you back to the Red Pavilion. The Red Pavilion, the largest brothel in the capital. Hearing that name, blood surged up my throat. After 5 years with him, he knew exactly what I feared most. I also knew that his expression was not a joke.
Duchess, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you or accused you.
I shouldn't have harbored any expectations for him. As soon as I finished speaking, my throat tightened, and I spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering James's face. I smiled apologetically at him.
I'm sorry.
James once said I didn't smile enough, wasting my beauty. So, whether sad or happy, I always smiled when I saw him. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was his panicked eyes as he pushed Emily aside and rushed towards me, and a trembling Sophia.
Sophia!
Sophia, are you all right? You look pale.
I'm fine, Daisy. Just don't say anything about James. I know what you're thinking.
In the private room of the theater, this was the first time I seriously looked at him since our reunion. He had become more somber and reserved than 3 years ago, although this was his true nature. In front of others, he always pretended to be carefree and easygoing.
I wronged you before. I did many things that hurt you because I didn't understand my own heart. Now I know clearly that I can't live without you. So, will you come back to the mansion with me?
I accept your apology, but I can't go back with you.
Can you give me a reason? I can change.
If someone had told me 3 years ago that James would apologize to me and change himself because he loved me, I would never have believed it. But it happened, after I no longer loved him. No, I should say, after I realized I loved myself more.
There is no reason. The person you like isn't the real me. It's the obedient and compliant Sophia, the one I pretended to be to stay by your side. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing and upsetting you, afraid of doing the wrong thing and causing you trouble. I couldn't ask or dare to ask about your matters. You just feel uncomfortable because you suddenly lost a pet. If you truly liked me, you wouldn't have believed Emily's words without listening to my explanation. I don't blame you for using me as bait. After all, I sought you out first to leave the brothel. You've treated me well over the years, so I don't hate you. You don't need to feel guilty. Let's just leave it at that, okay?
I denied his feelings, but I knew I was wrong. If I were just a pet, he wouldn't have been so persistent for 3 years. I did this to make him completely let go of me. We stared at each other across the table, my reflection in his eyes. He understood my thoughts, and I understood his intentions. I wanted freedom and respect, which he couldn't give. He wanted me to be obedient and compliant, which I couldn't do.
Okay.
As I walked out of the private room, Daisy immediately approached, clutching her skirt and hesitating to speak. I smiled and took her downstairs.
Daisy, do you want to go with your sister or stay with your big brother?
This?
I stayed here for you, but you only have your big brother in your heart.
I don't.
All right, I'm just teasing you. I still need to prepare your dowry so you can have a grand wedding.